Hi guys, welcome back to my booktube channel Read with Harshu. So let's continue with the book today. And then there were none. Chapter 3, Scene 1. Dinner was drawing to a close. The food had been good, the wine perfect. Rogers waited well. Everyone was in better spirits. They had begun to talk to each other with more freedom and intimacy. Mr. Justice Wargrave, mellowed by the excellent port, was being amusing in a caustic fashion. Dr. Armstrong and Tony Marston were listening to him. Miss Brent chatted to General MacArthur. They had discovered some mutual friends. Vera Clayton was asking Mr. Davis intelligent questions about South Africa. Mr. Davis was quite fluent on the subject. Lombard listened to the conversation. Once or twice he looked up quickly. His eyes narrowed. Now and then his eyes played around the table, studying the others. Anthony Marston said suddenly, "Quaint, these things, aren't they?" In the center of the round table, on a circular glass stand, were some little china figures. "Soldiers," said Tony. "Soldier Island. I suppose that's the idea." Vera leaned forward. "I wonder how many are there." "10. Yes, 10 there are." Vera cried. "What fun! They are 10 little soldier boys of the nursery rhyme, I suppose. In my bedroom, the rhyme is framed and hung up over the mantelpiece." Lombard said, "In my room too." "And mine, and mine." Everybody joined in the chorus. Vera said, "It is an amusing idea, isn't it?" Justice Wargrave grunted, remarkably childish, and helped himself to the port. Emily Brent looked at Vera Clayton. Vera Clayton looked at Miss Brent. The two women rose. In the drawing room, the French windows were open onto the terrace, and the sound of the sea murmuring against the rocks came up to them. Emily Brent said, "Pleasant sound." Vera said sharply, "I hate it." Miss Brent's eyes looked at in surprise. Vera flushed. She said more composedly, "I don't think this place would be very agreeable in a storm." Emily Brent agreed. "If no doubt the house is shut up in winter," she said. "You'd never get servants to stay here for one thing." Vera murmured, "It must be difficult to get servants anyway." Emily Brent said, "Mrs. Oliver has been lucky to get these two. The woman's a good cook." Vera thought, funny how elderly people always get names wrong. She said, "Yes, I think Mrs. Owen has been very lucky indeed." Emily Brent had bought a small piece of embroidery out of her bag. Now, as she was about to thread her needle, she paused. She said sharply, "Owen, did you say Owen?" "Yes." Emily Brent said sharply, "I have never met anyone called Owen in my life." Vera stared, but surely she did not finish her sentence. The door opened and men joined them. Rogers followed them into the room with a coffee tray. The judge came and sat down by Emily Brent. Armstrong came up to Vera. Tony Marston strolled to the open window. Floor studied with naive surprise a statuette in brass, wondering perhaps if its bizarre angularities were really supposed to be in female figure. General MacArthur stood with his back to the mantelpiece. He pulled at his little white moustache. That had been a damned good dinner. His spirits were rising. Lombard turned over the pages of Punch that lay with other papers on the table by the wall. Rogers went round with a coffee tray. The coffee was good, really black and very hot. The whole party had dined well. They were satisfied with themselves, with the life. The hands of the clock pointed to 20 minutes past 9. There was a silence, a comfortable, replete silence. Into that silence came the voice, without warning, inhuman, penetrating. Ladies and gentlemen, silence please. Everyone was startled. They looked around at each other, at the walls. Who was speaking? The voice went on, a high, clear voice. You are charged with the following indictments. Edward George Armstrong, that you did upon the 14th day of March 1925, caused the death of Lucia Mary Cleese, Emily Caroline Brent, that upon the 5th of November 1931 you were responsible for the death of Beatrice Taylor, William Henry Bloor, that you brought about the death of James Stephen Landor on October 10, 1928, Vera Elizabeth Clayton, that on the 11th day of August 1935 you killed Cyril Olive Hamilton, Philip Lombard, that upon date in February 1932 you were guilty of the death of 21 men, members of an East African tribe, John Gordon MacArthur. That one was the 4th of January 1917. You deliberately sent your wife's lover, Arthur Richmond, to his death. Anthony James Marston, that upon the 14th day of November last, you were guilty of the murder of John and Lucy Combs. Thomas Rogers and Ethel Rogers, that on the 6th of May 1929 you brought the death of Jennifer Brady. Lawrence John Wargrave, that upon the 10th day of June 1930 you were guilty of the murder of Edward Seton. Prisoners at the bar, have you anything to say in your defense? Scene 2. The voice had stopped. There was a moment's petrified silence, and then a resounding crash. Rogers had dropped the coffee tray. At the same moment, from somewhere outside the room, there came a scream and a sound of a thud. Lombard was the first to move. He leapt to the door and flung it open. Outside, lying a huddled mass, was Mrs. Rogers. Lombard called, "Marston." Anthony sprang to help him. Between them, they lifted up the woman and carried her into the drawing room. Dr. Armstrong came across quickly. He helped them to lift her on the sofa and bent over her. He said quickly, "It is nothing. She's fainted, that's all. She'll be round in a minute." Lombard said to Rogers, "Get some brandy." Rogers, his face white, his hands shaking, murmured, "Yes, sir," and slipped quickly out of the room. Vera cried out, "Who was that speaking? Where was he? It sounded, it sounded." General MacArthur spluttered out, "What's going on here? What kind of a practical joke was that?" His hands were shaking. His shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly 10 years older. Lore was mopping his face with a handkerchief. Mr. Justice Wargrave and Miss Emily Brent seemed comparatively unmoved. Emily Brent sat upright, her head held high. In both cheeks was spot of hard color. The judge said the judge sat in his habitual pose. His head sank his head sunk down into his neck. With one hand he gently scratched his ear. Only his eyes were active, darting round and round the room, puzzled, alert with intelligence. Again it was Lombard who acted, Armstrong being busy with collapsed women. Lombard was free once more to take the initiative. He said, "That voice, it sounded as though it were in a room." Vera cried, "Who was it? Who was it?" "It wasn't one of us." Like the judge, Lombard's eyes wandered slowly round the room. They rested a minute on the open window. Then he shook his head decisively. Suddenly his eyes lighted up. He moved forward swiftly to where a door near the fireplace led into an adjoining room. With a swift gesture, he caught the handle and flung the door open. He passed through and immediately uttered an exclamation of satisfaction. He said, "Ah, here we are." The others crowded after him. Only Miss Brent remained alone, sitting erect in her chair. Inside the second room, a table had been brought up, close to the wall which adjoined the drawing room. On the table was a gramophone, the old-fashioned type, with a large trumpet attached. The mouth of the trumpet was against the wall, and Lombard, pushing it aside, indicated where 2 or 3 small holes had been unobtrusively bored through the wall. Adjusting the gramophone, he replaced the needle on the record, and immediately they heard again, "You are charged with the following indictments." Vera cried, "Turn it off, turn it off, it's horrible." Lombard obeyed. Dr. Armstrong said with a sigh of relief, "A disgraceful and heartless practical joke, I suppose." The small clear of Mr. Justice Wargrave murmured, "So you think it's a joke, do you?" Doctor stared at him. What else could it be? The hand of the judge gently stroked his upper lip. He said, "At the moment I am not prepared to give an opinion." Anthony Marston broke in. He said, "Look here, there is one thing you have forgotten. Who the devil turned the thing on the set is going." Wargrave murmured, "Yes, I think we must inquire into that." He led the way back into the drawing room. Others followed. Rogers had just come in with a glass of brandy. Miss Brent was bending over the mourning form of Mrs. Rogers, adroitly Roger slipped between the two women. Allow me, madam. I'll speak to her. Ethel, Ethel. It's all right, all right. Do you hear? Pull yourself together. Mrs. Rogers' breath came quick gasps. Her eyes, staring frightened eyes, went round and round the ring of faces. There was urgency in Roger's tone. Pull yourself together, Ethel. Dr. Armstrong spoke to her soothingly. You'll be all right now, Mrs. Rogers. Just a nasty turn, she said. I didn't faint, sir. Yes. It was the voice, the awful voice, like a judgment. Her face turned green again. Her eyelids fluttered. Dr. Armstrong said sharply, Where's that brandy? Rogers had put it down on a little table. Someone handed it to the doctor and he bent over a gasping woman with it. Drink this, Mrs. Rogers. She drank, choking a little and gasping. The spirit did her good. The color returned to her face. She said, I am all right now. It just gave me a turn. Rogers said quickly, Of course it did. It gave me a turn too. Fear made me drop that tray. Wicked lies it was. I'd like to know. He was interrupted. It was only a cough, a dry little cough, but it had the effect of stopping him in full cry. He stared at Mr. Justice Wargrave, and the latter coughed again. Then he said, Who put on that record on the gramophone? Was it you, Rogers? Rogers cried. I didn't know what it was. Before God, I didn't know what it was, sir. If I had, I'd never have done it. The judge said dryly. That is probably true, but I think you'd better explain, Rogers. The butler wiped his face with a handkerchief. He said earnestly, I was just obeying orders, sir, that's all. Whose orders? Mr. Owens. Mr. Justice Wargrave said, Let me get this quite clear. Mr. Owens' orders were what exactly? Rogers said, I was to put a record on the gramophone. I did find the record in the drawer, and my wife was to start the gramophone when I did gone into the drawing room with the coffee tray. The judge murmured, A very remarkable story. Rogers cried, It's the truth, sir. I swear to God, it's the truth. I didn't know what it was, not for a moment. It had a name on it. I thought it was just a piece of music. Wargrave looked at Lombard. Was there a title on it? Lombard nodded. He grinned suddenly, showed his white pointed teeth. He said, Quite right, sir. It was entitled Swan Song. Thank you for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more updates. Click on the bell icon and don't forget to subscribe to my channel Read with Harshu. Stay tuned. Bye, guys.